Okay, welcome back. We are doing a drawing of Ryan Gosling today in profile. We're going to begin with his cranium. Remember, craniums or crania are about 20% wider than they are tall, so you can make this little placeholder in the middle to show where the center of it is, and you should have a half circle on either side. The ear hole goes near the bottom of the cranium. In this photograph, it's slightly to the back. I'm not yet attempting to draw the actual shape of his forehead. I'm just drawing an average cranium, as you can see. The brow ridge is very prominent on Mr. Gosling. It's right at the center of this half circle where we expect it to be. Line of the face, I'm going to just drop that straight down. I'm not sure exactly how long it is yet. We're going to measure that in a second. And if we look for the bottom of the ear, that's going to define about where the bottom of the cranium is going to be. Remember, he has pretty full hair, so basically what we've done so far is like this. And we did the brow ridge and the line of the face coming straight down. Now, what we've discovered is that usually this distance from the brow ridge to the bottom of the cranium is about the same as, or let's go to the bottom of the nose. I think his cranium probably goes a little further down than I drew it. The craniums should be around the bottom of the nose. So these two distances, here to here, are usually about the same, and I would say they are the same in Mr. Gosling. So we're going to draw from the bottom of the cranium out. That'll define the bottom of the nose. And then we're going to mark where the brow ridge was, and we're going to double that distance. And that gets us to the bottom of the chin. Hope that's clear. These are proportions I expect you to get right. If I tell you it's halfway, do it halfway, or I'm going to count off when I grade these. So here's the line of the face. We're going to jump right into the bridge of the nose, which is very clearly defined on Mr. Gosling. So we've got pretty strong brow ridge, and then we have a pretty deep indent under the brow ridge. It's a pretty wide curve, wider than usual there. And then we have this angle is about 20 degrees from vertical, 25 degrees. And then the peak is well above the bottom of the nose, so we're going to peak it right here, and then we're going to curve under like this. So we're getting used to thinking of angles, preferably by name. You know, say to yourself what you think the angle is. And we could also think about, do a little fractional thinking and think like this distance here to here is about twice as big as this distance from here to here. Now I'm going to put the line of the face back in as a kind of reference line. That's going to help us with knowing how far back to make this. You see how the philtrum is just in front of this. If you drop a line from just under the brow and go straight down, that's going to tell you that the philtrum's just a little further out than that. Now we're going to do more fractional thinking, and we're going to say, is this distance 1/3 of this distance? Does it look like 1/3, less than 1/3, or more than 1/3? What do you, anyone have an idea? I would say less than 1/3. You're absolutely right. There's two reasons for that. One is we can see immediately that his nose kind of comes down pretty far from the nostril, but also, like many celebrities, he has a pretty huge chin. So we're going to be sure to make this a little bit less than 1/3 of the way down. Not a full third that we would typically have. So we do a little undercut for the upper lip. Then we do, I would say this is about a 45-degree angle down for the bottom lip. And then I'm going to use some more fractional thinking, and I'm going to say that the center of this curve is about 1/3 of the way down between the bottom lip and the chin. So we're going to go 1/3 of the way, and then we're going to curve out with this very strong chin. Now, it does not, however, come out further than the philtrum, so I kind of overshot there, but sort of like that. His throat goes straight back. And notice that we know this distance, and this distance is about the same. You see that? So if you know that, you can establish that pretty easily. So it goes back about this far, and then it slopes back, which we've learned to expect. Now, if you look at carefully at the profile, you can see this is not a pure profile. That's kind of why the ear is a little further back than usual. It's not a pure profile. We can tell because we can see the eyelashes on this side. You see that? That means that his head is tilted just slightly towards us. If it was a pure profile, we wouldn't be seeing the eyelash over there. And to be honest, there's really something unusual about his face, because remember, we've learned to always look for the eye below this indentation. But this indentation on him is very long and extended, and his eye is like right behind it. So we're going to mark eye level right behind the center of that indentation, which I hardly ever see. And how far back to make the eye? That's a tough one. Okay, so we don't really have any reference for that yet, so I'm going to create a reference by starting with the ala, right? Because we know where the philtrum is, we know where the tip of the nose is, so we know this distance, and the ala is equidistant the other way. In other words, the philtrum is centered below the nose, which it usually is. So that tells me to put the ala about here, the back of the ala. That's not where the nostril goes. The nostril on him is further forward. It's sort of centered over the philtrum, but it's a very exposed nostril, sort of like that. But now that I've determined where the ala is, the back of the ala, now I go straight up and see that's going to tell me where the front of the eye is. And I know I'm talking a lot, but we now need to know how far back the eye goes, and notice that we could fit one eye into this space between the indentation and the back of the eye. So basically the eye needs to be the same width as this, so that puts the back of the eye about here. Don't feel bad if you're not used to thinking about things this way, but believe me when I say that if I was drawing this even before receiving any training, this is how I learned to talk to myself, and that's why everyone told me I was a good artist compared to like people who couldn't draw. I think it was mainly that I knew how to think about things fractionally and locate things the way I'm describing to you. And sadly, this method is hardly ever taught, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not too difficult. So now I'm saying I set my eye a little too far back. Okay. So having drawn the eye, that's going to help us with how far back the mouth goes. It goes back to about as far as the back of the iris. You see that? And so we know where the bottom lip is, and this just slopes up a little. These looks kind of happy. And we are not ever going to be outlining these lips. We're just going to very, very lightly shade the upper lip. Notice his upper lip is not very visible. Okay, so at this point, as some of you may have noticed, I made a pretty major miscalculation, and this happens to my students all the time, so I don't really mind that this happened, because this is going to help you become better artists if you learn how to recover from this. So what happened is somehow I ended up with my eye being way above the middle of his head, but if I look at Ryan Gosling's actual face and I take a quick measurement, I can see that his eye is exactly in the middle of his head. Notice I'm marking the top of his head here, not up here, because his hair has body. But what I'm saying is this distance and this distance should be the same. So I've done an okay job on his features, but my cranium at this point looks really way too small. Would everyone agree with me? And probably those of you who are following along with me, you have the same problem. So all we do at this point is we take this distance and we double it, and that tells us where the top of the cranium should be. And having marked where the top should be, now I can redraw the cranium a little bigger and bring it more into scale with the features that we drew. You see how easy that was? It's really not a hard thing to do, but you always want to check that, because on all my rubrics, the only way you can really fail one of these drawings is if you put the eye way out of center, that's not going to be acceptable. Like, you should know to put the eyes in the middle. Okay. Okay, now we're going to get into the specifics of the forehead. So we've got the brow ridge, and then he has what we would call a very steep forehead. Can everyone see that? So from the top of the brow ridge, we're going to go basically straight up for a little while, and then we're going to curve back towards the top of his cranium like that. And that's a very important form on him. If you want it to look like Ryan Gosling, you have to get that forehead. His head's at a slight angle. I think that kind of messed me up in the beginning, but so the bottom of his ear's level with the top of his ala, and the top of his ear is level with his eyebrow. So his ear's a little high. That's the angle that we're looking at this head at. So we're going to make those reference lines to place the ear vertically. For the horizontal placement, I'm going to take another measurement. I'm going to measure from the brow ridge to the bottom of the chin. And what I'm seeing is that this distance, brow ridge to the bottom of the chin, is about the same as brow ridge to the back of the ear. You can check it for yourself. This is what I just measured. That puts the back of the ear way back here. Again, because his head is turned a little. So that means when I block the ear in, it's going to be behind where I said the ear hole was going to be. But that's a little more accurate. That's going to obviously force a little more depth to the, well, I don't know. I think that's mostly hair. So that feels a little high. I'm just going to bring that down a little. So try to place your ear. It's very important to have enough space, though, between the front of the ear and the back of the eye. So just check that space. It might help if we kind of block in the sideburn, make sure everything doesn't feel too crowded. Feels like maybe I made my eye just a little bit big, so I'm going to trim that. And that seems about right to me now. Remember that the ear always sort of tilts back. The lobe is going to be peaking closer to the jawline, and the top is going to be peaking closer to the back of the head. So it's on an angle like that, which is typical. Now we're going to look at the parts of Mr. Gosling's ear and familiar location of the tragus, the antitragus, the helix. Notice that the sort of shell of his ear at the top of the helix is very narrow compared to most people. You see that? So we're going to sort of hug that line, and then it fades out all the way down here behind the antitragus, like that. Then we're going to come from the antitragus up and around under the helix for the overlap, and a little shading here and here and here, and we're done. I just noticed, though, that he doesn't really have a detached earlobe. Let me check that. Oh, I don't know. I guess he does have just a tiny. He does have a little tiny detached earlobe right like that. And you can see there's this little shadow here is not his jaw. That's the back of his sternocleidomastoidus muscle, which we've talked about. That's that muscle that runs from behind your ear down like this. So that is what we're seeing there. The shadow for the jaw is out here in front of the earlobe, which is where we expect it to be. Okay, so we're going to do a little more shading to define that jawline. Remember, if you're right-handed, you're shading the other direction, not like you see me doing. Please get used to that. And before we get into detail on the features, we're going to block in the hair. And to show you how I think about that, I'm going to do a quick block in with a straight line. So this is a complex curved form, and we're going to try to understand it in terms of a simple box. So this is basically what we're going to draw first. And we're going to be relating the corners of the box to things that we've already drawn. So like this corner here aligns with the top of the brow ridge. So we find the top of the brow ridge, go back. That's where this direction change happens. If I check my work, this direction, if we extend it down, should go to the chin. So I can make sure that that angle's right by making sure that line goes to where I want it to go. This line is virtually horizontal, and it's way up here above the curve of the forehead. This line slopes forward a little. This line slopes up a little and ends right where this intersection happens. This is almost straight across, angling down, angling in. And this line, if we continued it, would end just below the earlobe, like that. Here's the basic angle of our jaw. Notice that the jaw is running parallel to the collar. So we know this direction. That's going to help us get the collar going, moving the same way. And we end up blocking things in kind of like this. Now we're going to turn it into some curves. This obviously cuts off this corner. And this is round. These corners are rounded. Sort of like that. And he has dark hair. His hair everywhere is darker than his skin is anywhere. So I'm going to erase some construction lines. If you don't have time to erase your construction lines, it really doesn't matter. This is just practice. But before we do final shading, it's a good idea to get rid of those. And I'm going to do a first shading on his hair so he doesn't look blonde. So we're getting down to this is sort of a good place to assess the drawing. I'm asking myself if it looks like him, and what I'm feeling like. This bothered me before, but I feel like his eye is just a little too far back into his head. And so I'm going to move my eye forward about a 1/16 of an inch. Maybe even an 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to assess it and ask myself if that looks more like Ryan Gosling. And I think that's a little better. You're going to see minuscule adjustments that you might need to make in your drawing. Don't be afraid to make them. We haven't committed to anything yet. We haven't spent a lot of time on any details. This is the time to make your adjustments. Okay, the lighting in this photograph is kind of unfortunate. It is not particularly form lighting. But there's a little halftone under the eyebrow. There's a little halftone along the top of the nostril, top of the ala, I mean. This feels like probably a flash photograph. Yeah. What happens in a flash photograph is planes that are facing us are very bright, and as the planes fall away from us, away from the flash, they get slightly darker. So if you are still struggling with your proportions, please focus on that. But if you are pretty good with proportions, you can try to do some of this shading. He really does have a lot of nostrils showing. Very open. It's really facing us, and it has a lot of height. So that was helpful right there. His ala towards the back is very skinny. You see that? And he's got just the beginning of a little crease here, but notice I'm using my very faintest shading line to define that. And this crease does not intersect with this other crease at the corner of the mouth. It's something we've talked about, but I'll keep those separate. And he's got his little Hollywood stubble going on here, so we can start to shade that down. Don't try to shade every hair, I'm sort of using a kind of a broken first shading technique. And the bottom lip, I'm going to indicate the color change with just the faintest touch of shading. And then more important is this plane change underneath, which is way down here. Notice the color change and the plane change do not usually line up perfectly with each other. Plane change is where the form turns away from us. Down here, the color change is where the bright red fades into the flesh tone. But it's starting to look like him, I think. Every hair on a beard casts a shadow onto the skin. So where the beard is long, I'm definitely going to do a first first, and then I'm going to do the little beard hairs on top of that. It looks weird if you just do the beard hairs because you're not suggesting that they are casting shadows, but they actually do. Okay. And he's got this subtle plane change. He doesn't have a defined eye socket, which is partly what makes him look very youthful. He's got no bags under his eyes. He does have this very subtle plane change along here, which is where the eye socket is turning into the nose. And it sort of continues, but a little softer right down there. And those features actually help make it look more like him. Here's that other eyelash we talked about. And surprisingly, for kind of a lean and fit Hollywood celebrity, he does not have really any definition, any hollowing under his cheekbone. You see that? He's got very smooth, full cheeks. So don't just get in the habit of adding things like that. If you don't see them, you don't draw them. And we already did first shading here. We can draw some of the hairs on his sideburn. And let's see if we can see any shadow mapping on the head, the hair. Always really good to try to shadow map the hair if you can. We already did shade it down once. That was to indicate local color, which you'll recall is the term that refers to just the color that something is versus the effects of light on it. Now we're going to draw, shadow map this edge where the head is turning away from the flash. And always think of these forms in terms of these flame-like shapes. And weirdly, because it's a flash, we're getting them along all the areas that are turning away from us, even at the top of the head. We're getting some of these jaggedy forms. Now I'm going to do one more first shading, but darker, inside the shadow map I just created. And I'm pressing harder, but I'm not using my full pressure yet because I want to save that for the hairs themselves. I'm still kind of just blocking in some tone. And the last step, this is where you can press as hard as you want. And this is where most people start when they're drawing errors with this. So notice we've done a lot of preliminary work, but now we're going to draw the hair the direction it goes, and we're looking for this detail shading of these little clumps of hair that are really dark within the shadow shapes. Just within the shadow shapes. This is where you can press as hard as you want. And there's a few up here. And there's a few up here. There's also some details inside the lighter area of the hair, but we're going to do those with a much lighter touch because these are in full light. and they do not get as dark as the details that are inside of our shadows. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I like to sort of squint, look at my drawing, and look back at the photograph or the live model, and just make sure all my darks are balanced in my drawing the same way I find them balanced in the reference. You know, make sure that the overall pattern of light and darks corresponds pretty closely, which I'm feeling okay about this. And I think I'm going to do a little first shading on his blazer. The blazer is optional, so please don't do this if you are still trying to get your proportions right. And if you get bored over the summertime, this is a great thing to practice because you do not need an art teacher to tell you that you got it right. You can ask your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad, who's this? And if they say, it looks like Ryan Gosling, then you know you did it. And if they don't have any idea who it's supposed to be, then you try again. And that's the wonderful thing about portraits. Unlike anything else you draw, any amateur can assess your work with a very, very high degree of accuracy. And if everyone recognizes Ryan Gosling, then you know that you did a great job. Okay, I'm going to call it a day with this video.
Are you recording this for your
Yep, this is going to go onto my channel. So thanks for watching, everyone at home. Woo! Woo! Okay. Smash that like and subscribe button, people.